This video is sponsored by Nvidia, and for a couple years now, Nvidia has offered to sponsor a video of mine where I talk about their AI gaming technologies, but I've always turned it down because the tech wasn't dialed in properly. But right now, I feel like it is because you can pick up an entry-level gaming laptop, like just $800-900, and be able to play top-tier AAA titles with awesome frame rates, and it's because of their technology. So when it comes to AI in gaming, the most prominent form of it for Nvidia is their DLSS technology, which is essentially AI-enhanced graphics that amps up the gaming experience. And when this technology launched in 2019, I thought it sucked. I straight up said in a couple videos that the technology is cool, but it's not really ready for consumers, and also I didn't think it was worth buying new hardware for. That was a very strong opinion that I had. And I even did a video about the first 20 series gaming laptops that had DLSS capabilities. The features that you're getting, the benefits that you're getting with these new RTX devices are not well showcased on laptop hardware. And Nvidia contacted me right after. They're like, hey, Dave, that was a cool video and all, but why didn't you talk about DLSS? And I said, because it's not great. Now, the reason why I thought that back then was in 2019, DLSS did not look good on 1080p laptop screens. It was often upscaled from really low resolutions, it was often blurry and had artifacts, and it was not supported by a lot of games. So my stance on DLSS was understandably not very positive back in 2019. But fast forward 4 years later, and today we're looking at a completely different product. So right now it looks a lot better, and secondly, it's got a lot more support. It has almost 500 games and apps that support it, but most importantly, it has so many more features than it used to, and I think a lot of people have an outdated and inaccurate impression of what DLSS even is. So when it first launched, DLSS was just a super sampling technology. It would take lower resolution frames, and then using AI, it would upscale those frames to higher resolution. So you could just play games at higher resolution without it taxing your GPU as hard. And that was for DLSS 1, and for the most part, DLSS 2. It's just that DLSS 2 had better image quality. But right now, we're at DLSS 3.5, and at this point in time, it's like this full suite of tools that uses multiple kind of deep learning technologies to be able to bring a way better gaming experience. So first is their super resolution. That's the AI upscaling tech that they launched with, but nowadays it looks as good as native graphics, sometimes even better than native graphics. It's crazy. This tech used to be so unrefined, but because Nvidia continued to train that AI model over time, it now looks so much better than it used to. The second is their Nvidia Reflex, and this is their latency reducing technology. So the idea behind it, the mechanics of this, is very sweaty, but it's so good and it's so effective at reducing input latency for competitive shooters. And it's also available for games that aren't Twitch shooters. There's a whole slew of games that can take advantage of the technology. And the third is arguably the best and coolest feature of DLSS 3.5. It's frame generation. So the idea is that you take AI generated frames and you insert them in between natively rendered frames. And in theory, this could give massive boosts in frame rate for smoother gameplay. Now, when they first launched this, my initial kind of concern was that by doing this, by introducing these artificially generated frames, and the game engine isn't part of this process, you could theoretically introduce too much input lag. Now, having used this for a bunch, I think the simplest way to look at it is that it is not noticeable. That introduction of input lag is not noticeable if you have a high enough base frame rate. If you can hit 30 to 35 frames per second natively, turning on frame generation is awesome. It feels very smooth, especially because you'd be running NVIDIA Reflex to reduce input latency at the same time. Frame generation is an incredibly powerful tool. I feel like the way that NVIDIA's implemented it is very impressive. It just looks so good already. It's only been out for a year. I can only imagine what it'll look like in 3 or 4 years' time. The last and latest tool of DLSS 3.5 is ray reconstruction, which essentially gives you better looking and more efficient ray tracing. Look at the difference between these two scenes here. When you have ray reconstruction on, there's just much more detail in that ray traced reflection. Now, their AI-enhanced gaming tech isn't perfect. It's a lot better than it was from 2019, but occasionally you'll still see some artifacts. But I think the biggest issues pop up when you lean too heavily on this AI stuff. If you have a native frame rate of, let's say, 20 frames per second, and you turn on frame generation, you're gonna have a bad time. I don't think we're at the point yet where you're gonna have really weak GPUs that just get hard carried by AI to the top. At least not yet. But in general, when you have DLSS capable games and you have modern NVIDIA GPUs in a device, you just get way better performance than you would expect at that price point. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is energy efficiency. So when it comes to, the increasing GPU capabilities over time, there's often an increased power demand that goes with it. So every generation of GPU that comes out, if you'll notice, the power requirements for those GPUs go up. And on a desktop system, it's a simple solution. Just buy a new power supply, right? But on laptops, it's a very different story. You have very strict power and thermal limits on these devices. You're trying to keep them thin and portable. So when you have a new GPU that comes out, you can't just blindly crank up the wattage on these systems, right? They are capped at a very strict limit. So when you have good quality AI upscaling and frame generation technologies available, it just does not make sense to only tunnel vision on the traditionally rendered graphics performance, because we're seeing a massive shift in both GPU capabilities and efficiency with DLSS. Okay, I want to draw your attention to a couple of games. The first here is the new Cyberpunk 2077 expansion, Phantom Liberty. Now, I've replayed the base game so much that I think I've seen every ending. This game showcases a lot of what DLSS 3.5 can do, and on a high-end system with like an RTX 4090, it looks absolutely incredible. But on an RTX 4050 laptop, you can already natively break 60 frames per second on ultra graphics. And this is without DLSS or anything. It's just the native frame rate. But if you want to, you can turn on DLSS, you can turn on ray tracing, and you can get amazing ray trace graphics with excellent performance still. And the fact that you can play Cyberpunk, one of the most graphically demanding AAA titles, with this kind of image quality and frame rate on an $800 or $900 gaming laptop is absolutely incredible. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that Nvidia's AI-based gaming tech is as good as it is. Now, the second game I want to show you is Alan Wake 2. So this game came out a couple weeks ago, and it looks amazing. I think it's like a technical masterpiece of in-game visuals. It's essentially a showcase of the best graphics tech that developers can use nowadays. And it's also a really good game. But there was controversy around this game because just before it launched, the minimum requirements of the game were released. And to be able to get 30 frames per second at 1080p with, I guess, like medium graphic settings, the requirement was an RTX 2060. The minimum requirements for it. And people were understandably riled up because this is a pretty powerful graphics card. But then the game was released to wonderful reviews, and it turns out the graphics scale really well. It can flex awesome visuals if you have powerful hardware, but if you don't, it still plays incredibly well on lower settings. And I think when developers push that envelope like that, it's actually a good thing. Obviously, it's a little uncomfortable for players that are just at the cusp of not having the right hardware to pull it off, but it does move the whole industry forward. And Remedy, the developer, like that's just what they do. The original Alan Wake was one of the first games ever to make use of a quad-core CPU, and people thought they were crazy for pushing the industry like that back then. And they also made Control, which was one of the first games to prominently feature ray tracing, but it's other developers as well. I remember when Red Dead Redemption 2 first came onto PC, people were pissed. Like that game was so demanding that when you ran it on hardware at the time, I think we were on like 20 series GPUs, people were like, the developers suck. The developers are lazy. This game is way too demanding. But it's because the world didn't have the hardware at the time. But then people got better hardware. It got DLSS support. And now it's regarded as one of the best looking games of all time. So yeah, I think when it comes to hardware being pushed, I think that's just the nature of how the industry moves forward. Now, there's another layer to all of this. So right now, globally, there's this push, a pretty strong push toward generative AI. So stuff like ChatGPT and Midjourney and DALL-E, like there's a whole bunch of technologies out there that lean on NVIDIA's hardware. Like NVIDIA empowers a lot of the generative AI stuff out there. They use their A100 and H100 GPUs. But because NVIDIA is so deeply ingrained in this whole generative AI stuff, I think it's very soon that we see generative AI come into game development. So you could have intelligent NPCs that you could have like natural language interactions with generative facial expressions and mannerisms that use AI models. It'd be crazy stuff, but we have seen some early demos of that tech with NVIDIA's Ace. But in general, the whole idea of generative AI coming into game development, yeah, I mean, I think it's just around the corner. And when it does, it'll be a truly transformative moment for what games even are. But in terms of NVIDIA's DLSS, when it launched, it was so underbaked that it just dulled my enthusiasm for anything to do with AI-driven gaming. It was just so weak. But it's awesome now, to the point where like it gives you better frame rates, it gives you better performance, it does it with less heat, it does it with less power. Like the whole idea behind it is just, it's so good. For regular gaming, it's already a win, but on laptops, it's a huge win. And I really think it's the future of portable gaming. All right, there you have it, NVIDIA DLSS.